She'd told him to leave 3 times. He just tipped his hat and picked up the hammer again. That was the first week. By the second, she stopped asking. She just set a plate on the table, didn't say a word. That plate, that silence, that was how it started between us. She'd told him to leave 3 times. He just tipped his hat and picked up the hammer again. That's the part people remember. But I need to take you back before the hammer, before the hat, before any of it meant what it came to mean. Back to a man sitting alone at a bunkhouse table, staring at a plate of food he didn't earn yet. September 1881. The plate had 2 cold biscuits on it and a smear of bacon grease. The wind was already talking outside, coming down off the mountains like it had somewhere to be. I sat on a cot that wasn't mine in a room that wasn't mine, and I listened to it, and I did not unpack my saddlebag. My name is Eli Dawson. I was 44 years old that September. I'd been drifting 19 years. 19 years of bunkhouses and borrowed cots and plates of food I hadn't earned yet. I was good at leaving. That was my one true skill. Not horses, not cattle, not fence work, though I could do all 3 well enough to keep getting hired. No. What I was best at was the leaving. There'd been a wife once, Margaret, a son. I was 25 and living outside Joplin, Missouri, and I had a house with a door that stuck, and a boy who grabbed my thumb when I picked him up, and a woman who deserved a man who stayed. I sent money for 3 years after I left. Letters came back for 2. Then they stopped. I never went back to find out why. I carried that silence with me the way some men carry a flask, close to the chest, always within reach, never quite empty. 43 days I'd been on the road from a ranch in Wyoming where I'd spent 7 months mending fence for a man who paid fair and never asked questions. I left because the work was good, and the foreman shook my hand and said I had a place there as long as I wanted it. That's the kind of thing that made me saddle up. A place as long as I wanted it. The promise of staying was the thing I couldn't bear. So, Garnet Creek, Montana, late September. $14 in my pocket and a horse throwing a shoe. The town was barely a town. A general store with a porch that leaned east. A blacksmith shop trailing smoke. A handful of buildings pushed up against the base of the mountains like they were hiding from the wind. The creek ran through the middle of it, clear and cold, and the cottonwoods along the bank were just starting to go gold. Virgil Teague shod my horse. He was a stocky man, late 60s, silver white hair combed straight back, a short-handled blacksmith's hammer tucked through the loop of his heavy black leather apron. He had small dark eyes beneath bushy white brows, and he used them like tools, measuring, testing, deciding. He worked slow and deliberate, didn't speak for the first 10 minutes. Then he spoke carefully. Holloway Ranch, 3 miles north. The widow lost her hired man to the gold camps back in August. He set the hoof down and straightened, pressing both hands into his lower back. Winter's coming early this year. You can smell it. I could smell it. The air had that edge to it, that thin blade of cold hiding inside the wind. She managing alone? I asked. Virgil looked at me, really looked. The birthmark on his right temple was the color of weak tea, and I noticed it because he turned his head slow, like he wanted me to see all of his face, every year written on it. She's managing, he said. That ain't the same as doing well. He said it like a door he was holding open exactly 2 inches.
just enough for a man to decide whether he wanted to push through. I heard the test underneath it, whether I was a man who could be trusted around a woman alone on a ranch, with winter bearing down. I said nothing. Virgil watched me say nothing and seemed satisfied by it. 3 miles north.
I found the Holloway Ranch at the end of a dirt road that wound through sage and bunch grass, with the mountains stacking up behind it like a wall God built to keep the rest of the world out. 160 acres, 60 head of cattle spread across a valley that caught the afternoon light. A cabin, a barn, a bunkhouse, good land, hard land, land that would eat you if you let it. Clara Holloway was splitting wood. She had an axe that was too heavy for her, and she swung it like she'd made peace with that fact a long time ago. Dark auburn hair pulled back in a low bun, loose strands catching the wind. A faded dark blue work dress with the sleeves rolled over a gray wool undershirt, a worn leather apron tied at the waist. Her hands were reddened from the cold and the labor, her cheeks flushed pink. She was maybe late 30s. She was not beautiful the way a painting is beautiful. She was beautiful the way a fence line is beautiful, straight and true and standing where it was supposed to stand because somebody put it there and kept it there through every storm that tried to knock it down. She did not stop swinging when she spoke to me. "I'm not buying anything, and I'm not interested in the Lord's word." "I'm not selling either one," I said. "Virgil Teague said you might need a hand through winter." The axe came down, split the round clean. She set another one on the block. Her left hand turned the thin gold wedding band on her finger, just once, a motion so practiced she probably didn't know she did it. $15 a month, she said. "Room and meals." $15 a month. In 1881, that was low. That was almost an insult. She knew it. She was watching my face the way Virgil had watched it, testing, measuring, waiting for the flinch, the counteroffer, the negotiation that would tell her what kind of man I was. "All right," I said. She watched me a beat longer, didn't get the reaction she was looking for. Or maybe she got exactly the one she needed. The bunkhouse was a drafty one-room cabin behind the barn. A cot, a wood stove with a cracked flue plate, and a window that didn't close right. She stood in the doorway and pointed to each thing like she was daring me to complain. I didn't. She did not invite me to supper. I ate cold biscuits alone that night, sitting on the edge of a cot that smelled like dust and old wool. The wind came down off the mountains and pressed against that broken window, and I listened to it for a long time. My saddlebag sat on the floor beside the door, still packed, ready to go. The tarnished brass pocket watch on its leather cord hung from my coat pocket where I draped it over the chair, ticking quiet in the dark. That was the first night of what would become the rest of my life. I just didn't know it yet. The first week, Eli fixes what is broken, and Clara watches every stroke of his hammer with the critical eye of a woman who has learned to do everything herself and resents needing someone who does it better. He started with the barn door. The bottom hinge had rusted clean through, and the door dragged across the dirt every time it swung. Clara had been lifting it with her hip to close it. He could see the wear pattern in the ground. He didn't say anything about it, just pulled the hinge, shaped a new pin from scrap iron he found behind the woodshed, and rehung the door so it swung true. Took him half a morning. She stood in the doorway of the house and watched, arms crossed, chin up, that thin gold wedding band catching the light as she turned it slow on her finger. The corral gate came next. Then the chimney flue that had been leaking smoke into the kitchen. She'd stuffed rags around the seam, and they'd gone black with soot. He pulled them out, reseated the pipe, sealed it with clay and ash mixed to a paste his father taught him to make when he was young enough to think fathers stayed. They spoke in short sentences about practical things. Fence posts, hay stores, the temperature. She'd say, "The south fence is leaning past the creek bend." He'd nod. She'd say, "There's hay in the upper loft, but the floor's soft." He'd check it. That was the language. Work asked and work answered. 6 weeks compressed into rhythm. 36 fence posts replaced. 4 loads of hay moved from the upper loft to the lower before the floor gave way. The temperature dropped 2 degrees every week, steady as a clock winding down. Eli's tarnished brass pocket watch swung from its leather cord against his coat as he worked, and he checked it only to know how much daylight he had left. Daylight was the only currency that mattered. Josephine was a different matter entirely. She tested him the way you test ice on a river, pressing hard, waiting for the crack. Left gates unlatched so the horses wandered. Ignored instructions he gave about the water trough freezing overnight. Stood in the barn one morning, that battered novel stuffed in her back pocket, her father's oversized green flannel hanging off her lanky frame, and told him flatly that the last hired man stole a saddle when he left. "Took it right off the rail," she said. "Middle of the night. Mama found the empty peg in the morning and didn't even look surprised." She was 19, furious at Montana, furious at the isolation, the mud, the wind that never stopped, furious at her mother for refusing to sell. That fury came off her like heat from a stove. You could feel it from across the room. Her hazel green eyes watched him from under her brows, arms folded tight, weight shifting from one too big boot to the other, daring him to prove her right about men who drift through. Eli absorbed all of it. Every unlatched gate, every ignored instruction, every cold stare. He didn't defend himself, didn't explain, just relatched the gates, refilled the trough, let her words land, and didn't flinch. What he did was start checking hooves one afternoon when she happened to be in the corral. Didn't ask her to watch, didn't lecture, just picked up the bay mare's front left, ran his thumb along the frog, found the stone bruise forming, and cleaned it out with his knife. Slow, careful, the way you do something when you want someone to see the difference between doing it and doing it right. Josephine stood 3 fence rails away, arms folded, watching. Next day he did the same. Day after that, she was standing closer. 4th day, she crouched down beside him without a word and held the hoof while he worked. Her hands were rough for 19, capable. She resisted asking questions for about 2 minutes, then asked 1, then 3, then couldn't stop. That stubborn jaw of hers softened just enough to let curiosity through. First crack in the armor, small as a hairline in glass, but real. Clara saw it. She was standing across the corral, hands on her hips, that dark auburn hair pulling loose from its bun in the wind. She saw her daughter lean in, saw the girl's shoulders drop half an inch, and something moved across Clara's face that she killed before it could settle. Hope, maybe, or the memory of what hope costs when it doesn't hold. She turned the wedding band on her finger, went back inside. The screen door closed behind her, and she didn't look back. Late October brought the first blizzard, early even for Montana. 3 days of white nothing, Wind screaming off the peaks so loud you couldn't hear yourself think. They hunkered down, fed the stock from stores, kept the stove burning. Second night, Eli found the mare, the older chestnut, heavy with foal, down in her stall, breathing wrong. He put his hands on her belly and felt the foal sitting crossways. Breech. 14 hours. That's how long it took. Eli in the stall with his sleeves rolled past his elbows, the cream wool of his Henley soaked through with sweat and worse. Clara held the lantern steady the entire time, never wavered. Her hand didn't shake once. Up in the hayloft, Josephine watched with her knees pulled to her chest, that novel forgotten beside her. The foal came just before dawn, slick and trembling and alive. It breathed. The mare lifted her head, and the barn filled with that particular silence that only follows something being pulled back from the edge. Gray light through the slats. Eli sat back against the stall wall, his hands covered, his pale gray-blue eyes half closed. The brass watch hung still against his coat. Clara looked at his hands, looked at his face. "You've done this before," she said. "Many times." "Where?" And for the first time, he told her something true. A ranch in Wyoming. 2 years he spent there. Good land, good work. He loved it. Left anyway. Left because staying frightened him more than going. Clara heard what he was not saying. She did not push. By December, something had changed that neither Eli nor Clara would acknowledge, and the proof was a third plate set at the supper table without comment. She just put it there. No announcement, no invitation. One evening the table had 2 settings, and the next it had 3, and Clara Holloway stood at the stove with her back to the room like nothing in the world was different. Eli sat down. He looked at the plate. He looked at his coffee. He did not say thank you, because thank you would have named it, and naming it would have made it something they'd have to decide about. Josephine came in from the cold with her braid over one shoulder and her battered novel tucked in her back pocket. And she saw the third plate, and she looked at her mother, and she looked at Eli, and she said nothing. She sat down and opened her book and waited for supper. The observer always sees the love before the leads do. That's the rule. And Josephine Holloway, 19 years old, with her father's stubborn jaw and her hazel green eyes watching everything from under her brows, she saw it clear as creek water. After that, Eli started repairing things Clara had not asked him to repair. The rocking chair with the broken slat. He found the right piece of pine in the barn and shaped it with a draw knife, and fit it so clean you couldn't tell which slat was new. The window frame in the kitchen that let cold air whistle through at night. He pulled it, reseated it, packed it with oakum he'd bought in town for 30 cents. A shelf above the dry sink that had been leaning for months, maybe years, held up by a tin can wedged underneath. He leveled it, set it right. Each repair was small. Each one said the same thing. "I am not leaving tomorrow." Clara watched him work. She stood in doorways with her arms crossed, her chin slightly lifted, and she turned that thin gold wedding band on her left hand, turning it slow with her thumb, the way she always did when she was thinking something she would not say. Josephine opened up in pieces. At meals, she talked to Eli. First about the horses. Which ones needed shoes? Which mare had a tender left fore? Then about books. She'd read a novel 3 times and wanted to know if he'd read it. He hadn't. She told him the plot anyway, all of it, talking fast with her hands, and he listened completely. Not performing attention, just listening. The way a man listens when he has no opinion to protect. Then one night she told him about Daniel, her father. How he laughed so loud the horses would lift their heads in the pasture. How he sang hymns off-key on Sunday mornings while he made flapjacks. How the horse rolled on him crossing the flooded creek in the spring of '79. And how Clara had ridden out alone to find him. And how she'd come back leading his horse with an empty saddle. Josephine told it flat, the way you tell something you've told yourself 100 times to make it smaller. Eli did not look away. He did not offer comfort. He sat with his pale gray-blue eyes steady on her face, and he let her say every word. Clara stood at the stove with her back to them both. Her hands were still. She did not turn around. But I know what opened in her chest that night, because I felt it too, years later, when someone listened to the thing I could not stop carrying. It is the most dangerous feeling in the world. It is the feeling of being seen. Virgil Teague came by in January. He rode up slow on his gray mare, his silver-white hair combed back from his high forehead, the short-handled blacksmith's hammer tucked through his leather apron loop the way it always was. He had business with Clara about a plowshare. They talked in the barn. Eli was mending harness 40 feet away and heard none of it. But I'll tell you what Virgil said, because Clara told Josephine later, and Josephine told me in her own time. He said Eli Dawson was the kind of man who leaves. Said he'd seen a dozen like him pass through. Said she should protect herself. Virgil wasn't cruel about it. He was careful, which was worse. Clara said nothing. That night she was distant at supper. She set the food down and sat and ate and did not look at Eli once. He noticed. He always noticed. Neither of them spoke about it. The silence was louder than the wind pushing against that reseated window frame. Then Haskell came. He rode up on a Tuesday in late January, his polished black boots catching the pale winter light, his silver watch chain stretched across his vest like a declaration of ownership. Haskell, the neighboring rancher, a widower of 50 with a soft middle and pale brown eyes that appraised everything they touched. He'd made his interest in Clara known since Daniel died. Not romantic interest, acquisition interest. He sat in Clara's kitchen, and he drank her coffee, and he made his offer. Fair price, he said. Fair price for 50 acres a woman alone cannot hold. He said that. Cannot hold. Like the land was a thing too heavy for her hands. Like she was borrowing something that belonged to a man. Clara sat across from him with her arms crossed and her chin lifted, and that dark freckle above the right corner of her lip set in a line that could cut glass. She refused. The refusal was quiet and absolute. She said no the way you close a gate. Haskell smiled the way men like him always smile. Tolerant, patient, like he was waiting for the world to teach her what he already knew. After he left, Eli found Clara sitting on the porch in the cold. Her breath made clouds. Her hands were in her lap. The wedding band caught what was left of the light. "You're still here?" she said. She did not look at him. "Until you don't need me," he said. She turned and looked at him. And what passed between them was not a declaration, but a recognition. Two people seeing each other fully for the first time. After that night on the porch, something shifts between Eli and Clara. Not toward each other, but toward a terrifying honesty, the kind that makes a man want to run and a woman want to bolt the door. The weeks that follow are quiet in a way that has weight to it. Not silence. Weight. like snow collecting on a roof beam, ounce by ounce, and you know the timber is strong, but you also know timber breaks. They work side by side the way they always have, mending harness, hauling water, forking hay into stalls where the horses stand steaming in the cold. But something has cracked open between them, and neither one of them is brave enough to name it. Their hands brush reaching for the same farrier's rasp one morning in the barn. Just knuckles against knuckles. Clara pulls back first. Eli picks up the rasp like nothing happened, but his pulse sits in his throat for the next 10 minutes, and he can feel her standing 6 feet away, not looking at him, turning that thin gold wedding band around and around on her finger. Then one afternoon Josephine says something. I never found out what, and Clara laughs. Full and sudden and real. The kind of laugh that comes out of a woman who forgot she still had one. Eli is in the barn oiling a bridle, and he hears it through the wall. He stops. His hands go still on the leather. The tarnished brass pocket watch on its cord swings against his coat and catches the light. He stands like that for 10 seconds, maybe longer. That sound undoes something in him he thought was permanent. Some wall he built out of silence and distance and 19 years of not staying anywhere long enough for a woman's laugh to matter. It matters now. Damn him, it matters. He does not go inside. He finishes the bridle. But his hands are different after that. Slower. Like a man who just realized he's holding something fragile and didn't know it. Late February. The ice on the porch steps gets worse with the freeze-thaw cycle, and one evening Clara comes out carrying a lantern and her boot catches the edge of the top step. She pitches forward. Eli is 3 feet away, coming up from the yard. His hand catches her arm just above the elbow. Firm, not rough. They stand like that for 3 seconds. Her weight against his grip, the lantern swinging. Her dark auburn hair loose from its bun, one strand across her cheek. Her brown eyes looking straight into his pale gray-blue ones. 3 seconds. Then she pulls her arm free. He lets go. Neither of them says a word. They go about the evening like it didn't happen. But from the kitchen window, Josephine watches. Her battered novel pressed flat against her chest, her hazel green eyes sharp beneath those straight, dark brows. And she almost smiles. Almost. Physical touch between those two was rare and earned. I know that now. Every second of contact carried the weight of every hour they spent close without touching. That 3 seconds on the porch step was worth more than a year of courtship in a parlor. And both of them knew it. And both of them were terrified. Then the letter came. Late February. A rider from town brought it out with the post. Thin envelope. Forwarded through 3 towns, Billings, then Helena, then finally to the Holloway Ranch. Return address was a law office in Jefferson City, Missouri, addressed to Mr. Eli Dawson. He opened it in the bunkhouse with the door shut. I will tell you what it said because he told me later, years later, sitting on a porch with silver in his hair, and his voice so quiet I had to lean in to hear him. His wife, Margaret, had died of fever 4 years ago. His son, a grown man of 19 now, was alive and had been looking for him. The lawyer's letter was simple and direct. It asked one question: does Eli Dawson want to be found? He did not come to supper that night. Clara set the table for 3 the way she always did. The stew went on. The bread came out. Josephine sat down and looked at the empty chair. She asked where he was. Clara's hands went still on the edge of the table, her knuckles white against the wood. She said, "He's not hungry." But her voice was flat in a way that meant she knew. Not what the letter said, but what a letter can do to a man who has been running from something for 19 years. She knew what paper and ink could cost. Her husband Frank had gotten a letter once from a cattle buyer in Bozeman, offering $12 a head for stock worth $20. Frank had torn it up. Some letters you tear up. Some letters tear you up. Clara stared at that empty chair, and she knew which kind this was. Dawn, 41 degrees, and the frost still on the ground. Clara comes out of the house and sees Eli in the yard, saddling his horse. His saddlebag packed. His faded brown canvas coat buttoned to the collar. That sand-colored hat pulled low. The brass watch swinging from his pocket like a pendulum counting down. She walks to him, stops 4 feet away, arms crossed, chin up. A woman who holds her ground even when the ground is falling out from under her. He tells her the truth, all of it. The wife named Margaret, the son he left behind, the 19 years of drifting, the $14 he had in his pocket the day he showed up at her gate, the money he used to send home until he stopped, the letters he used to write until those stopped too. He tells her everything, and his voice does not break because he will not allow it to break. But his hands shake on the saddle cinch, and she can see them shaking. When he finishes, Clara is quiet for a long time. Then she says, "So, you're a man who leaves." It is not a question. It is the thing she has been waiting to confirm since the day he arrived. Eli does not argue. He does not defend himself. He mounts up. Clara watches Eli ride out the gate at dawn, his saddlebag packed, and she goes back to splitting wood alone. The axe falls. The sound carries across the empty yard. Josephine watches from the barn door and says nothing. Eli Dawson rode south for 2 days, then east. Then he stopped at a creek crossing and sat with his horse for an entire afternoon, because that is what a man does when he is finally run out of road. The first day south, the land opened up like it was glad to be rid of him. Flat brown grass, no trees, no fences. Just the kind of empty that makes a man feel like he never existed in the first place. He camped that night by a dry wash with no fire, ate cold biscuit, stared at the dark. The horse stood over him like it had done 100 times before, patient and indifferent, because a horse does not care about your reasons. He turned east the second morning. No plan, just a direction that was not north. Not back toward Garnet Creek. Not back toward Clara Holloway standing on her porch with a harness in her hands and nothing in her face that asked him to stay. 19 years, 14 ranches, not one goodbye. He counted them in his head like a man counting coins he already spent. The spread outside Bozeman, where he stayed 2 winters and left on a Tuesday. The horse camp near Laramie, where he worked 4 months, collected $11, and walked out before the foreman woke up. A cattle outfit in the Bitterroot, where a woman whose name he could not remember anymore had set a plate for him at supper every night for 6 weeks, and he had ridden out at dawn on the 43rd day without so much as a nod. Every single one. The same pattern, the same stone in his chest that got heavier the longer he stayed, until one morning the weight of it pushed him out the door. He knew what it was. He had always known. It was not restlessness. It was not freedom. It was fear. Plain, ordinary fear, dressed up in a saddlebag and a good horse, and the lie that a man who keeps moving is a man who is choosing something. He was not choosing. He was fleeing. Every single time. The creek crossing sat 2 days' ride from Garnet Creek. Water ran clear over smooth stones, maybe 8 inches deep, cold enough to ache in his teeth when he drank from his cupped hand. He unsaddled the horse and let it graze. He sat on a flat rock with his boots in the mud and his elbows on his knees, and he stayed there while the sun crossed the sky and the shadows moved, and the water kept running, because water does not wait for a man to decide. He reached into the pocket of his faded brown canvas coat and took out the brass pocket watch on its leather cord. Tarnished. The glass was scratched so bad you had to hold it at an angle to read the face. His father's watch. The only thing he owned that was not replaceable. He turned it over in his hands, ran his thumb across the back where the engraving used to be, worn smooth now by 40 years of pockets and palms. His father had carried it through a war and a marriage and a slow death in a back bedroom in Ohio. And when it was over, Eli had taken the watch and left everything else, including a son, a boy, a baby, really, when Eli walked out. Too small to remember, old enough now to be a man, old enough to hold a letter with his father's name on it, and wonder why the man who wrote it had waited 19 years to pick up a pen. Eli sat at that creek crossing and thought about the letter he had never written, the one he had composed in his head on 100 cold nights in 100 bunkhouses, the words shifting and rearranging themselves until they meant nothing. Every version was a lie. Every version made him sound better than he was. Every version started with an excuse. So he wrote a different one. He pulled a stub of pencil from his saddlebag and a piece of brown paper that had been wrapped around a bar of soap. He smoothed it on his knee. The pencil was dull. The paper was thin. He wrote anyway. He did not promise to be a good father. He did not explain why he left. He did not ask for forgiveness, because a man who asks for forgiveness before he has earned it is just asking for permission to feel better about himself. He wrote 3 things. I am in Garnet Creek, Montana territory. I will be here. I am done running. The ink from the pencil was faint. The cold air dried it slow. He folded the paper and put it in his coat pocket next to the watch, and he sat there for another hour watching the water move. And then he stood up and saddled the horse and turned it around. 2 days back, the mountains getting closer, the Garnet Range rising out of the haze like something that had been waiting for him to stop being stupid. The fear did not go away. He rode toward it. That is the only difference between a man who stays and a man who leaves. The fear is the same. The direction is not. Clara was on the porch mending a harness when he came through the gate. Her dark auburn hair pulled back in that low bun, loose strands catching the late light. Her hands stopped moving. The needle stayed in the leather. She watched him dismount and stand at the bottom of the steps with his hat in his hands, the tarnished brass watch hanging from his coat pocket, his pale gray-blue eyes steady on hers for the first time without looking away. "I wrote to my son," he said. "I told him where to find me. I told him I'd be here." Clara said one word. "Here." "Here," he said, "if you'll have me." She did not answer immediately. She finished the stitch she was making in the leather, pulled the thread tight, cut it with her teeth. Then she said, "Supper's at 6. You know where the bunkhouse is?" He turned toward the barn. She said his name, just his name, quietly. "Eli." He looked back. The thin gold wedding band caught the light as her hand rested on the harness. She was almost smiling. Not quite. Almost. Josephine appeared in the doorway behind her mother, tall and lanky in her father's faded green flannel shirt, her single braid over one shoulder. She looked at Eli with those sharp hazel green eyes and said, "The bay mare threw a shoe. I tried to fix it, but I couldn't get the angle right." Eli set down his saddlebag and walked toward the barn. The mountains were still there. The wind was still coming down. And for the first time in 19 years, Eli Dawson was not leaving. But staying, he learned, is not a single decision. It is a decision you make every morning when you wake up and the road is still there. He fixed the bay mare's shoe. Took him 20 minutes. Josephine watched from the stall door with her arms folded tight, that battered novel sticking out of her back pocket. And when he finished, she said, "You do it different than my father did." Eli set the hoof down and wiped his hands on his trousers. "Probably," he said. She nodded once and walked away. That was enough. Spring of 1882 came in wet and loud. Calving season hit like a freight train. 14 new calves in 3 weeks, and every single one of them decided to arrive at the worst possible hour. Clara and Eli worked side by side through it. Same rhythm they'd built over the winter. Same silence. But the silence had changed. It was no longer the silence of strangers figuring out how close to stand. It was the silence of two people who had said the hardest things and were still here. She handed him rope. He handed her coffee. Their shoulders brushed in the barn doorway, and neither one flinched. Fences needed rebuilding after the storms. Eli spent whole days out on the south line, resetting posts, stretching wire, his faded brown canvas coat stiff with mud, and his tarnished brass pocket watch swinging from its leather cord every time he swung the maul. Clara rode out at noon with bread and cold beef. She'd sit her horse and watch him work, and sometimes she'd say, "Post is leaning," and he'd fix it. In May, a letter came, addressed to Eli Dawson, care of the Holloway Ranch, Judith Basin, Montana Territory. He didn't recognize the handwriting. He opened it standing by the mailbox with dirt under his nails and his hat pushed back from his forehead. His son's name was Thomas. He was 19, working as a clerk in St. Louis. The letter was careful, formal. He did not call Eli father. He said he had gotten Eli's address from a mutual acquaintance. He said he would like to visit in the summer, if that was agreeable. He signed it, Thomas Reed Dawson, in a hand so precise it looked like a clerk's hand, because that's what it was. Eli read it 3 times. Then he folded it and set it on the shelf beside his cot in the bunkhouse. Clara saw it there 2 days later. She looked at it, looked at him, and said nothing. She turned her thin gold wedding band once around her finger and went back to the kitchen. That woman understood silence better than anyone he'd ever known. Late April, an evening so still you could hear the creak from the porch. Eli walked down to the water behind the barn because he needed to think, and water helped him think. Clara was already there, standing at the bank with her sleeves rolled to her elbows, her dark auburn hair loose from its bun, loose strands catching the last copper light. She looked at him. He looked at the creek. Then she reached over and took his hand. Not accidental, not brushing past. She took his hand and held it. Her fingers were rough and warm and strong from years of work, and his were the same. And they stood like that, watching the water run clear over the stones. Neither spoke. The creek, the mountains, the last light. Enough. Thomas arrived in July. A young man, tall, dark-haired, with his mother's eyes and a handshake so formal it hurt. He looked at Eli the way you look at a man you've only seen in a photograph. The awkwardness was enormous. Eli had $14 worth of things to say and no way to spend any of it. But Josephine, God bless that restless, sharp-eyed young woman, she took charge. She showed Thomas the horses, the creek, the south pasture. She talked enough for all four of them, her braids swinging over her shoulder, her hazel-green eyes cutting between Thomas and Eli like she was measuring something. Over days, Thomas softened. His clerk's posture loosened. Eli taught him to check hooves, side by side, the same way. You learn a man by working next to him. Thomas learned his father that summer, and Eli learned his son, and neither of them called it what it was. Haskell came by one last time in August, rode up in his black wool coat and polished boots, that silver watch chain catching the sun, thumbs in his vest pockets like he owned the view. He saw Eli on the porch, saw Clara beside him, saw the 14 spring calves grown fat in the pasture. His pale brown eyes went narrow and appraising, the way they always did, and for a moment Eli thought the man would say something, some last little jab about drifters and property values and knowing your place. But Haskell just tipped his hat, turned his horse, and did not come back. Some men only understand the world when it stops bending to them. Virgil Teague visited that fall. He stood in the yard with his blacksmith's hammer tucked through his apron loop and his silver-white hair combed straight back. And he looked at Eli and Clara standing together on the porch, and he said, "Well, I've been wrong before." It was the only apology he would ever make. It was enough. Years later, 28 years of marriage to be precise, the ranch was 200 acres. Thomas came back after 2 years in St. Louis and brought a wife. Josephine married a young rancher from the next valley over. Grandchildren on the land. Silver hair now, both of them. Clara's hand in Eli's on that same porch. Her gold ring worn so thin you could almost see through it. The mountains still there. The wind still coming down. Eli Dawson finally understands that the opposite of leaving is not arriving. It is staying. It is waking up and choosing the same place, the same woman, the same life, until the choosing becomes so ordinary you almost forget it was ever hard. Almost.